Claire Thomas. That's the name printed in soft cursive on the ivory envelope that landed in my mailbox on a rainy Thursday morning. I remember holding it like it might burn, staring at the return address, my mother's handwriting, but Melissa's name. It took me 3 days to open it and less than 30 seconds to decide I was going. The thing about being the family's forgotten chapter is that people eventually stop pretending to read you. You're not disowned exactly, just edited out quietly like a typo they don't feel obligated to fix. Melissa and I hadn't spoken in years. Not since the last Thanksgiving, when I brought wine and she brought up how I always had to make things difficult. That was the moment I knew we lived in separate realities. Her world was one of manicures and country club brunches. Mine was one of spreadsheet silence and no one to lean on but myself. So when that wedding invite showed up, I thought maybe someone died, or worse, that someone finally remembered I existed. But still I went. Not for Melissa, or our mother, or the ghost of what a sister should be. I went for the version of me that used to hope someone in that house would notice when I left a room. The estate was in Napa, with all vineyard views and white stone pillars. A place where the air smelled like expensive linen and promises no one had to keep. I wore a tailored black jumpsuit, heels I could run a marathon in, and a necklace I bought for myself when my firm hit its first $1 million in revenue. No one greeted me at the door. Inside, it looked like a lifestyle magazine exploded. Gold accents everywhere, champagne towers, white roses by the bucket. The kind of place where people laugh in careful decibels and pretend discomfort is just another form of elegance. I caught my mother across the room. She smiled tight and brittle, as if trying not to choke on her own cordiality. Melissa appeared next, her dress pastel and perfect, her makeup subtle enough to scream money. She air-kissed me like I was a coworker she barely remembered. Then her fiancé came over, tall and polished with that rich boy posture that says he's never had to carry a thing in his life. He looked at me, then at Melissa, and said to the nearest cluster of guests, "This is Claire. Melissa's cousin is from Oregon. The artsy one. Kind of our family's oddball." And just like that, I vanished again. No one corrected him. Not Melissa, not our mother, not even me. I smiled, nodded, and let the words settle like dust on old furniture. In a room full of people wearing six-figure outfits, silence was my sharpest accessory. I watched Melissa turn back to her guests, voice bright, laugh, rehearsed. The conversation moved on like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't standing there absorbing the subtle violence of being misnamed and mislabeled. But I didn't flinch. Years of being underestimated build a certain immunity. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and found a corner near the fireplace, letting the shadows keep me company. Every now and then, someone glanced my way, curious, but not curious enough. It was always like this. I existed on the edges. Not hated, just inconvenient. They didn't know who I was. Not really, not then. But they would. Someone asked about the Oregon weather, and I replied with a vague nod and the word gray. That was when the man by the fireplace turned. He had the kind of presence that didn't need volume to draw attention, salt and pepper hair, crisp navy suit, and a stare sharp enough to slice through a hedge fund. His voice cut clean through the soft clinking of glasses. "Thomas," he repeated, eyes narrowing like he was pulling a file from memory. "Are you Claire Thomas of Thomas Capital?" The pause that followed wasn't long, but in that room it landed like a thunderclap. Conversations around us hesitated, not quite stopping, but shifting, like a breeze that knows a storm is near. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled, the kind you wear when you know something no one else in the room does. The air thinned. Melissa laughed louder from across the room, a note of panic tucked beneath the melody. The groom, Ethan, poured himself another drink with more force than necessary. Douglas stepped closer, studying me now with the focus of someone used to holding power and not entirely sure if he still did. "I've read about your firm." He said it as a statement, not a compliment. My glass stayed at my lips. I let him read what he needed to between the lines. Someone cleared their throat nearby. Another guest asked about the string quartet. The room tried to resume, but the shift had happened. Douglas knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to make him uncomfortable in his own house. He didn't press. He turned away eventually, but not before signaling to a younger man in a tailored vest, who immediately pulled out a phone. I saw his thumb moving fast. Search queries probably. Numbers. Names. Connections. No one asked me a follow-up question. No one offered me a seat or asked how I knew Melissa. But their silence rang differently now. It wasn't dismissive. It was cautious. I moved toward the edge of the patio, letting the cold air replace the heat rising from my chest. Inside, laughter resumed with a little too much effort. But I knew the truth. Something had cracked. And while they might not admit it, they felt it too. It was the moment the room stopped pretending I didn't matter. And that, for me, was the beginning. Melissa had ballet lessons before she could spell her own name. Every Saturday morning, our mother would pull her hair into a neat bun and drive her to a private studio with mirrored walls and polished floors. I stayed home folding laundry and memorizing multiplication tables taped to the fridge. There were no family photos of me in the living room. Just Melissa's recital shots framed in gold. My achievements didn't make it past the report card envelope even when I brought home straight A's or skipped a grade. If I ever tried to speak up, I was told not to be dramatic. I learned early that love in our house was a reward, not a constant. Melissa was easy to love. I was easy to ignore. We shared a mother, but not a world. She got birthday ponies and tea parties. I got silence and chores. When Melissa broke a neighbor's window, our mother paid for the repair and baked cookies for the family. When I came home 10 minutes late from the library, I lost my phone for a month. The rules weren't just different. They were designed to remind me where I stood. I kept my head down. That was the safest way through. I stopped asking to be seen and focused on getting out. School became my refuge. Numbers didn't lie. Logic didn't favor favorites. I won scholarships, competed in national math tournaments, and landed internships before my peers even considered resumes. By the time I was 25, I had founded a boutique financial firm from a shared apartment and a used laptop. While Melissa was planning destination vacations and monogramming towels, I was pitching investors and sleeping 4 hours a night. I built something that could not be taken away by indifference. Every contract I signed, every deal I closed was a brick in the wall between their world and mine. We hadn't spoken in almost a decade when the wedding invitation came, and even then, it felt more like a formality than a gesture. I wasn't invited because I was wanted. I was invited because it looked better than leaving me out. But I went. Not to make peace, but to remind myself how far I'd come. I didn't need their recognition. I had already built a life they couldn't comprehend. They saw me as the shadow. What they never realized was that I had learned how to thrive in the dark. Ethan found me near the back terrace holding a glass of champagne that had gone warm in my hand. He walked over like someone approaching a minor inconvenience, that smile of his fixed and hollow. For a man trained to charm, he didn't seem to recognize when someone had stopped playing along. So, Oregon, right? You're kind of the quirky artist type. Yeah, just helps everyone keep things simple. I didn't respond, just raised an eyebrow and took a slow sip. He didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. Melissa joined us seconds later, slipping an arm through his like a leash disguised as affection. She looked at me, eyes too bright. It's just easier, Claire. People get confused otherwise. Our dynamics are complicated. I tilted my head slightly, watching her search for words that might make her sound kind instead of calculated. Simpler for whom exactly? For people like Ethan? Or for her who had never wanted to explain to me at all? Ethan chuckled, clearly thinking the moment had passed. Melissa said you were unpredictable. I smiled then. A small, quiet one. The kind that made people rethink whether they'd said too much. His confidence was paper thin, but he didn't know it yet. Melissa glanced at me again, fingers tightening around his arm. Her voice dropped just enough to feel rehearsed. This day isn't about the past, Claire. Don't make it uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That was her word for truth. I said nothing. There are moments where silence feels like surrender, and moments where it's a loaded weapon. This was the second kind. They didn't ask me what I thought. They didn't ask much of anything. That was the mistake. Not the insult, not the dismissal, but the assumption that I would absorb it quietly. That I would let them write the narrative just like before. Ethan tapped his drink against mine, like we were all in on the same little joke. Melissa leaned in to kiss his cheek, her smile too wide, her posture too posed. They looked polished, perfect, deliberate. I let them have their moment, because what neither of them knew was that their last comfortable evening had just ended. The smirk, the labels, the ease with which they shoved me into a corner, they'd remember all of it later. When the pieces began to move, when the silence turned out to be the loudest part of the night, Douglas found me outside, standing near the garden wall, as the last bit of sunlight slipped behind the hills. His footsteps were measured, but there was a tension to them, like a man walking toward a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. When he stopped beside me, he didn't offer pleasantries. Are you the Claire Thomas behind Thomas Capital? I didn't look at him, just nodded once. Yes, I'm the managing partner and principal negotiator. His silence stretched heavy and calculating. We've been in talks. Your team has kept things very anonymous. That was the idea. He shifted his weight, uneasy now. Do you know the company we're discussing a merger with? I do. And I know it's built on 3 subsidiaries your firm depends on to float its short-term margins. His jaw clenched. The math was already adding up in his head. So, what do you want? I turned to face him then. I want the merger to proceed as outlined. No delays, no adjustments. But your son stays out of it. He's careless and short-sighted. Those traits don't mix well with money or power. Douglas blinked, then nodded slowly. Understood. I could see it on his face the moment he realized what the room hadn't. That the woman they tried to write off as background was the one holding the pen. This isn't personal, I added. If it were, the terms would look very different. I came to close a deal, not make a scene, but I won't allow Ethan to interfere. Not now, not ever. His mistakes aren't mine to fix. Douglas exhaled like a man trying to recalibrate. Then he said, You could have embarrassed us. Why didn't you? I turned back toward the garden voice, steady. Because I don't need an audience to win. He didn't speak again, just nodded once sharply, then walked off into the house. Later, he'd make the calls, revise the documents, quietly erase Ethan from the process. And no one would question it, because power, when used right, doesn't need to shout. It just moves. The morning after the deal closed, I sat at my desk and stared at the final numbers. It was everything we'd planned for clean, profitable, and strategic. But instead of satisfaction, I felt a quiet question settle in. Now what? For a long time, success had been about survival. About proving something to people who never thought I could build anything worth noticing. But now that the papers were signed and the leverage was mine, I realized I didn't want to hold power over anyone, especially not them. So I made a call. I asked my team to reassign the profits from the 3 acquired properties into a new trust. Not for investors, not for optics. For young women, like the version of me who used to read business books in borrowed library time, wondering if anyone like her ever made it. We started laying the foundation for the Thomas Institute for Financial Access. It wouldn't just be scholarships or internships. It would be hands-on training, mentorship, and real tools for independence. Budgeting, investing, and credit literacy. The kind of knowledge that isn't handed down in households like mine used to be. I didn't want to punish my family anymore. That chapter was closed. What mattered now was building something that didn't just feed my pride, but fed someone else's future. Legacy isn't about names printed on walls. It's about who gets to walk through doors because you held them open. I never had that door growing up, but I had the grit to carve one out of brick. There was a strange peace in knowing the same people who once looked through me now had to read my name on trust documents and institutional letterheads. But the real reward wasn't their recognition. It was the quiet shift inside me that no longer needed it. For the first time, I wasn't moving out of spite or hunger. I was building because I could, because it mattered, because someone had to show the next girl that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. Not forever. Not if you write your own terms. The wedding came and went without me. I had received the follow-up invitation a week after the deal was finalized, tucked inside another cream-colored envelope that matched the first. This time, I didn't hesitate. I declined. There was no anger behind the decision, just clarity. I had already been in the room where everything shifted, and I had no interest in pretending anything had been mended. Melissa left me a voicemail the night before. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She said she missed me, that she wished things had been different, and that maybe one day we could talk. There was no mention of the deal or Ethan or the way she had introduced me, just a fragile attempt to reach backward. She also sent a letter, handwritten. Apologies were folded between lines of small talk. She hoped I was well, said our mother had regrets too, asked if we might start fresh. I didn't reply. Not because I was punishing her, but because I didn't need to perform the role anymore. The one where I showed up hoping to be seen. I had already seen myself. That was enough. The day of the wedding, I took a long walk through the city. Central Park, in early spring, still carried a chill, but the light was golden. I stopped for coffee, sat on a bench near the lake, and watched couples take photos with strangers holding their coats. A text came in from a cousin I barely knew, attaching a picture of Melissa in her gown. She looked radiant. Ethan was smiling beside her, arm raised mid-toast. But even through the photo I could see it, the strain around the edges. The kind you don't notice until you've stopped trying to fit into someone else's frame. I closed the image and slipped my phone into my coat. The breeze caught my hair as I leaned back, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just free. Some absences are louder than presence, and mine had said everything I needed it to. 3 days after the wedding, I found myself in a downtown cafe, between meetings, the kind with exposed brick and jazz humming low in the background. I was reviewing notes for a board presentation when I noticed a young woman hovering a few steps from my table. She looked like she was trying to decide if she had the courage to interrupt. She clutched a notebook, eyes darting between me and the door. Finally, she stepped forward and asked if I was Claire Thomas. I nodded, half expecting her to pitch something or ask for an internship, but instead, she just smiled. She told me she had read about the Thomas Institute in a financial blog. Said it had changed the way she thought about money, about possibility. Her voice trembled slightly as she thanked me. Not for the success or the scale, but for making room. I listened quietly, unsure of what to say. Compliments still caught me off guard, but there was something different in her eyes. She wasn't looking at me like a name on a press release. She was seeing the work, the intention, the choice to build something better. It hit me in a quiet way how much I had craved that kind of recognition. Not from Melissa or my mother or even Douglas Whitmore, but from someone who understood the why behind it all. Someone who didn't care about family trees or guest lists. Just outcomes. I thanked her sincerely and told her to keep learning, keep pushing." She nodded, notebook still clutched to her chest, and left with the kind of energy that reminded me of myself 10 years ago. Hungry, focused, ready. As she walked out, I leaned back in my chair and looked around the cafe. No one else had noticed. No applause, no headlines, just a moment between two people, small and honest. And yet, it stayed with me. Longer than the merger papers, or the voicemail from Melissa, or even the final numbers printed on the acquisition brief. Because this was the kind of redemption that mattered. It wasn't loud. It didn't need an audience. It was just a quiet, steady proof that I had made something real, something lasting. And in that stillness, I realized I didn't need anyone to finally see me, because the right people already had. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Melissa had introduced me properly that day. If Ethan hadn't smirked. If our mother had pulled me aside and said something kind even once. Maybe I would have softened. Maybe I would have stayed longer. But I'm glad they didn't, because what they gave me unintentionally was the freedom to walk away. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but with clarity. They built walls. I built something bigger, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I didn't need their version of acceptance. I didn't burn bridges. I bought the river, and I redirected the current. Every decision since that party has been mine. Every document signed, every building purchased, every initiative launched. Not a reaction to their silence, but a result of mine. A silence that came with power, not apology. The beauty of doing things on your own terms is that no one gets to define your success for you. There's no approval to chase, no room to beg entry into. I stopped asking for a seat at their table the moment I realized I could build my own. It's not about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being unshakable, knowing who you are even when no one claps. That's the win they'll never understand. I haven't spoken to Melissa since her voicemail. She hasn't reached out again. Maybe she's waiting for the right time. Or maybe she's come to terms with the fact that some stories don't circle back. They evolve. They move on. I still keep the letter from Douglas tucked inside my office drawer. A single line handwritten on thick paper. "Thank you for reminding us who we were dealing with." I never needed the words, but they stayed with me not because they came from him, but because they came after. Now when I walk into a room, I don't think about who might recognize me. I think about who might benefit from the space I've created. The doors I've left open. The version of me I've chosen to become. And that more than anything is the legacy I care about. Not revenge, not reputation, but direction. A life that moves forward with purpose, no matter how many people once tried to hold it back.